Welcome to Mode Bespoke, I'm Atenas. Today we're going to be working on these sock monkey socks. Now this is an intermediate to advanced Tunisian crochet project. You are going to need to know how to crochet a knit stitch as well as how to work in the round and how to create an extended return pass in order to create this project. So let's get started. The PDF pattern for this project is available in my shop. The link is going to be down in the description box below. This pattern also includes resizing notes, so if you are interested in resizing the sock, you can find that information on the pattern. So here's a look at the socks we're going to be crocheting today. Now, we're going to begin this pattern at the toe, but not at the very tip of the toe. We're going to do that at the very end. We're going to begin about here, work the body of the sock, and then go up on the leg or the sock height. You're going to finish with the cuff, and then at the very end, we're going to work the toes and the heel. So the toe and the heel are worked very similar, except that you have a color switch at the heel. So let's take a look at the hook you're going to need for this project. You are going to need a double-ended Tunisian hook. So you can use a long hook, a short hook, doesn't matter, but it has to be a double-ended hook. The hooks I'm using today are the KnitPal ones. So these are the new KnitPal 6-inch double-ended hooks. They come in a set of 5, and they start at 4 millimeters and go all the way to 6 millimeters. You can check out the description box if you'd like a link so you can get your own set. So the yarn I'm going to be using is Wool-like. This is available at Michael's stores in the US. It is a size 1 fingering yarn, and I've got 2 of these in gray, 2 in beige or ivory, and then 2 in red. Each skein, yes, I say skein, is 100 grams. So here's the information on the yarn. Like I said, it's a size 1 fingering yarn. If you don't want to use 2 threads simultaneously and you'd rather use like a tweed, you can use a size 2 or even a size 3 DK yarn. So I'm going to be using 2 threads at the front of the hook and then 2 threads for the back of the hook for our return pass. Now, if you prefer using just 1 thread instead of 2 in the front and then 2 in the back, you can go up a size in your yarn. So instead of using a size 1, you can use a size 2. I said earlier you can use a DK. It is going to make your sock a little bit bigger. However, you can still use it if you want to. It's going to be a bit more tightly knit since you're going to be using the same hook size. Now, this sock is an adult sock for women's shoe sizes 7 to 9, and that's in US sizes, or 37 to 40 in European sizes. You can resize this pattern. The resizing notes are all available in the written pattern, which is available in the link down in the description box below. So to begin, we're going to need 2 threads, and I got 1 thread in ivory and 1 thread in gray. I believe the exact color is charcoal if you're going to be using the wool-like yarn. Alright, since this is a more intermediate to advanced pattern, I'm not going to show you how to make a slip knot or a chain. You are going to need to make a chain of, the total is 36 stitches, so you'll need a chain of 36, but I'm going to chain 18 and then place a stitch marker on stitch number 18, and then complete the remaining 18 stitches and place a stitch marker on stitch 36. So right here, I've already crocheted a chain of 18. I'm going to grab my first stitch marker, and if you don't have stitch markers, I highly recommend you use anything you have, whether it's bobby pins, safety pins, whatever you have. It's going to make your life a lot easier when crocheting this. All right, now that I have my 18 stitches, I've got my stitch marker, I'm going to work my second set of 18 stitches so that I have a total of 36 stitches, and I'll see you again in a moment. Alright, so I've completed my chain. Now this chain measures approximately 8 inches, which is the foot circumference that I need for my shoe size. Now, to begin, we're going to skip that first stitch, and we're going to cast on beginning on the second stitch of the chain. To cast on, you just insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So it's just a regular Tunisian crochet cast on. At the end of your cast on, you should have a total of 36 loops on your hook. So here are all my stitches, they're all cast on. You will need a total of 36 loops on your hook. Now to work the extended return pass, this is going to be an extended return pass in the round. So if you were to be crocheting just regular Tunisian, you would be starting on this side. However, since we are working in the round, we're going to be using the back hook for our return pass. So to cast on into the back hook, you're going to need to turn your work around. So here's our working yarn. we're going to need to turn our hook so that we're working with the back hook. You're going to grab 2 new threads of yarn, and this is going to be the same color as the one you used for your cast on. Now, we're going to chain 2 using this first loop on the hook. Now, here in the tutorial, you're only going to see me do 1. I accidentally cut it off, so I don't have the chain 2, but chain 2, that's how you're going to begin the return pass. And then you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So yarn over and pull through 1 and 2. Now, for the rest of the return pass, so for all of these remaining stitches, the extended return pass is going to be worked as a chain 1 and then yarn over, pull through 2. So we begin here with that chain 1 and then yarn over and pull through 2. So you're going to pull through those 2 loops. So there's 1, 2, and you just repeat. So chain 1 and then yarn over, pull through 2. Complete the return pass until you have about 4 or 5 loops left on your hook, because we are working in the round, so you are going to still need to have a few working loops on the hook so you can turn around and then cast on additional stitches. So let me work into that point and I'll see you again in just a moment. So I made it to the end of the row and I've got about 4 loops left, so here they are. Now we're going to turn our work around and we have to cast on more stitches. So we're going to join this end with the very first stitch of the row and make sure that your work is not twisted. So check your foundation row, make sure that it's all facing the same direction. Here we go. All right, and we are not twisted, so we're ready to cast on. You are going to knit stitch into this very first vertical stitch. So remember that a knit stitch, you just insert your hook between the front and the back leg of the stitch, and then you just push back. So at this point, you're going to notice that you have 2 different working yarns. So you have this front yarn right here, which is your cast on yarn, and then you have the yarn right at the back of the hook, and this is your return pass yarn. So before you begin that first knit stitch, something I didn't pay attention to, which I'm glad I messed up because here I can show you this, you need to have your working yarn or your cast on yarn behind your hook. So you need it behind the stitch like this, and that way when you knit stitch, your yarn is going to be behind the hook like this. Now you would cast on and you're ready to begin. This is going to keep your yarn from getting tangled and it'll be on the outside of the sock instead of on the inside. Alright, so now we begin casting on knit stitches. So you're going to cast on a knit stitch into all of these vertical stitches until you can no longer cast on any more knit stitches comfortably. So this is what it's going to look like, the vertical stitch, now that you have, or if you are working with 2 threads. So you're going to have both colors there. Just pay attention to the stitch and make sure you are actually casting on correctly instead of just through one of the threads. You will need to go through both threads. So cast on as many knit stitches as you can comfortably, and then you're going to work your return pass. So if you have some experience working with Tunisian crochet, but this is your first time working in the round, this is what I mean by no longer being able to cast on comfortably. You have to pull on your fabric really tightly, and it's kind of difficult to insert your hook. Once you reach this point, you need to turn your work around. Make sure you turn your work in opposite directions every time to keep it from tangling. So you'll get the hang of it once you start working on it, no worries. You're going to turn your work so that you are looking at the back hook, and you complete your return pass, and this is just your chain 1 and then yarn over, pull through 2, until again you are left with about 4 or 5 loops on your hook. Continue casting on until you complete the round. Now, when you complete the round, you're going to get to that first stitch marker. So in my case, it was the pink one. So this orange one is my middle stitch marker. So complete your round, and that's going to be the end of round 1. So far we've done the foundation row. This right here, when we began, when we cast on that first knit stitch, that was the beginning of round 1. So from here on out, you're just going to knit stitch in the round for a total of 30 rounds. And the fabric is going to end up looking like this. So you're going to have a nice tube. So this back end is stretchy because this is our working side. This is our initial chain, and as you can tell, it is not very stretchy. That's why it is at the toes. So it's going to look like this. So this piece of the sock measures approximately 5 inches or about 13 centimeters. All right, so let's start working some increases. Now, just to make this easier to work with, I added the same color stitch markers up at the top. And this is going to help me keep track of the beginning of the row and then the center of the row, because we're going to be adding increases on each of the stitch markers. So for the next, 6 rows, we're going to have an increase on either side. So right now, we're going to be working with the 18 stitches here in the front, and then increase, 18 stitches on the side, and then increase back at the stitch marker. So let me get this all cast on again, and we'll begin with row number 31. And this is going to be the very first row of increases. The increases are worked the same between row 31 to 35. So let me move my stitch marker, and I'll show you what that looks like. There we go. All right, so your increase, all you're going to do is you're going to insert your hook into the chain space between the first vertical stitch, so this is our first vertical stitch of the row, and then the last vertical stitch, which is this one right here at the end. So right between these two vertical stitches, there we go, you're going to insert your hook, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And that's it. So that was the increase at the beginning of row 31. Now, the next set of stitches is going to be knit stitch 18 stitches. So we're going to do 18 stitches right here, and then we're going to do another increase at that midpoint, followed by 18 more stitches to finish round 31. So I've got, this is stitch number 17, and then here's my stitch marker. We got one more stitch. This is going to be stitch number 18, and then we have another increase. So for the increase, it is going to be worked between these two vertical stitches, so the vertical stitch between stitch number 18 and 19. So insert your hook into that chain space, yarn over, and pull up a loop. And now all that's left is the 18 remaining knit stitches of round 31. So cast those on. And remember to work your extended return pass as needed. So I have already finished casting on those remaining 18 stitches, and now I'm at the beginning of row 32. So here is that increase. So I'll be moving my stitch marker on this next one so you can see it. But this is what that increase will look like. So beginning row number 32, you need to increase, and look, I'll move my stitch marker now so I have it available. So between stitch number 18 and the first stitch of row number 32, I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, and increase one right here. And then I'm going to place my stitch marker on that increase. So this will help you keep track of where you need to be increasing for the remaining rows. So I've got my increase. Now for row number 32, I'm going to knit stitch 20 stitches, because remember, we just added 2 stitches to our row with our increase. So I'm going to place a stitch marker here in the back of the sock just to make it a little easier to explain this next part. So this is the bottom part of the sock, and here is the top part. So for row 32, I'm just going to give you stitch counts now since I showed you how to do the increases. Row 32, you begin with an increase and then knit stitch 20, and then increase, and in the back, you're going to work 18 stitches. So right back here, 18 stitches. And then row 33, you're going to begin with an increase. So increase right over here. And then knit stitch 20, increase, knit stitch 18. For row 34, you're going to increase, knit stitch 22, increase, knit stitch 18. For row 34, it's increase, knit stitch 24, increase, knit stitch 18. And for row 35, it is increase, knit stitch 26, increase, and then knit stitch 18. So complete through row 35, and I will see you at row 36. All right, so I'm at the beginning of row 36, and I've just left a couple of stitches here on my hook. So let's begin, and we're going to begin this also with an increase. So right before my stitch marker, I'm going to increase 1, and then I'm going to knit stitch 28. So let me move my stitch marker, knit stitch 28, and then do your increase, and I'll see you there. All right, so I've knit stitched my 28 stitches, so it's going to be stitch number 28. Now I need to increase, so I'm going to do my increase between stitch number 28 and 29, so just insert my hook into that chain space, and I'm going to move my stitch marker. Now I've already completed my return pass so that I have about 4-ish loops left on my hook, because for this next part we need to completely remove all of these loops off of our hook. We are going to be chaining, so let me just complete this return pass so that I'm left with 1 loop on our hook. You're not going to need the cast on yarn anymore, so the one I'm holding right here in my hand, this is my return pass yarn. I'm going to need this one. This one for the cast on, I'm just going to tighten it here, but you can cut this. You're going to have to cut it a little bit further in the pattern, so you can cut it now or just wait a little bit longer. But for now, I'm just going to leave it here. I'll show you how to cut this later. we're going to need to chain 18. Now this is for the heel. So we are not going to do the actual heel part just yet. All we are doing is leaving that space open so that we can continue to work the body of the sock in the round. Now this is what your work should look like. This is the yarn you can cut, you no longer need it. Here is the 18 stitches for the bottom part of the sock. That's why we made a chain of 18. So we have the same stitch count. We're going to attach this chain right here to this part of the sock, and it's going to leave us with an open section. So we will add the heel later. So we'll cast that on, and then we'll stitch it closed a little bit further along in the pattern. But this is what that section is going to look like. So now continuing, this is going to be for row 37. So once you have once you have chained 18 stitches, you're going to need to insert your hook into this very first stitch of row number 37, and then you're going to slip stitch. So cast on a knit stitch right into here. And once you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to pull this top loop through this bottom loop, so this one right here, through this one to slip stitch. And this is going to maintain our stitch count, otherwise we'd have an additional loop. So here's that first stitch, which we now have on our hook. All right, so I'm going to knit stitch 30 stitches, and then I will see you at the chain. So I reached my second stitch marker, and I've got one last knit stitch. So this is going to be knit stitch number 30 before we can move on to the chain. So I'll cast this one on, and then I'll show you what our work looks like so far. So let me get this stitch. There we go. So here's what it looks like. This is the top part of the sock. So we've got all our 30 stitches. I'm going to have to work that return pass, but this is what the back part of the sock is going to look like. So here's the heel. And now you're going to have this open space. And this is again at the bottom of the sock. This is where the heel part is going to be cast on towards the end of the pattern. We're going to continue to work in the round using that chain so that we can create the sock height. So we're going to cast on the next 18 stitches right onto that chain. So let me get some of these stitches off with the return pass, and I'll show you how to do that. Now, quick note, since we cut the yarn at the end of the last row, we're going to need to cast on again for that return pass. And remember that when you first cast on an extended return pass, you're going to chain 2 and then yarn over, pull through 2. And then you complete the return pass as you normally would, which is the chain 1 and then yarn over, pull through 2. All right, so I got rid of all of those stitches after I did the return pass, and now we're going to have to cast on into the chain. Now pay close attention when you cast on into the chain and keep a stitch count. It's easy to miss the first stitch. So I'm going to look for that first stitch. It's going to be kind of hidden, so it's very, very close to your fabric. Insert your hook into that stitch. I'm going to have to get this closer to my face so I can actually see what I'm doing. So I'm sorry, it's going to be out of focus here for a minute. But once I get that cast on, I'll show you right here. So there we go. That's stitch number 1 on the chain. Cast that on and then repeat that. There we go. With the remaining 17 stitches. So here's what it looks like once you've already cast on all 18 stitches. It's going to be just another foundation row. Now we're going to be at the beginning of row number 38. Now for row 38 through 41, we need to work some decreases. So I'll show you this first decrease. They're also going to be, much like the increases, one on either side. So your stitch markers are going to come in handy. So don't move those just yet. You're going to need them. So it's going to be the same. You're going to be increasing the number of stitches in the front. So before you were increasing them, you always had 18 stitches in the back. It's going to be the same once you start working the decreases. So the number of stitches in the front is going to decrease, but the number of stitches in the back is going to remain at 18. So this will make your stitch count a lot easier to work with. So to create that decrease, let me make some space here. You're going to knit stitch 2 together. So the first stitch is going to be right here at that stitch marker. So to knit stitch 2 together, you're going to Tunisian simple stitch into the first stitch. So just insert your hook behind the top leg of the stitch and then immediately insert your hook into the next vertical stitch. So Tunisian knit stitch in the first and then knit stitch in the second. And you're going to yarn over and pull through both of those vertical stitches. So now you've knit stitched 2 together. So we have just the 1 loop on our hook. And that's it. That was the decrease. So I'm going to move my stitch marker over and place it at that decrease. And then we're going to need to knit stitch 26. So I've got my decrease at the beginning of row 38, knit stitch 26, and then decrease, and knit stitch 18. So for those of you that need to see the decrease again, I've just knit stitched this 26 stitches, and I'm at my stitch marker. So this is the second stitch marker, and here are the 2 vertical stitches I need to knit stitch together. So right there. So for that knit stitch 2 together, remember it is a Tunisian simple stitch. So just insert your hook behind the top leg of that first vertical stitch and insert your hook into the next vertical stitch as a knit stitch. So Tunisian simple stitch and then immediately knit stitch, yarn over and pull through both loops, or not both loops, both vertical stitches, so that you're left with just 1 loop. Then you're just going to knit stitch into each of these stitches for the foundation row of those 18 stitches that we made. So just knit stitch 18, and then you're back at the beginning of the row for row 39. Leave you to crochet rows 39 through 42, and here are the stitch counts for rows 39 to 42. So it's going to be decrease 24, decrease 18. For row 40, it is decrease 22, decrease 18. For row 41, decrease, knit stitch 20, decrease, knit stitch 18. And then for row number 42, it's decrease, knit stitch 18, decrease, knit stitch 18. So this is what our fabric should look like right before we start working with the cuff. So here's a side-by-side view, but since you can't see it very well, I'm going to turn it here to the side. I'll lay this one over the top, and this is what your fabric should look like. So we've got the length of the sock, and here's the body. Now we're going to work on the cuff. Now before you work on the cuff, we're going to have to get rid of all of the stitches for the return pass. The cuff is going to be worked in just regular crochet, so this is where that optional hook comes in handy, but you can still crochet this part using the 4mm hook and you'll be just fine. So first let's get rid of all of these stitches. So I'm just going to cast these on, and I'm going to work that return pass so that I'm left with just 1 loop on my hook. And then you're going to cut your yarn. So cut all of the threads off. Before you cut your yarn though, chain 1 right here to make a small knot, and then cut your yarn. So I'm going to use my 2 threads of beige and 2 threads of red. Now you can switch this up and use whatever colors you want, but this is the colors I used right here. We are going to begin with an initial chain of 11 stitches. This is going to give us the width. If you want this to be wider, you can add stitches. If you want it to be more narrow, you can remove stitches. That is entirely up to you. We're going to work in sections of 4 and then 2 and then 4. So you'll get to take a look at that here in just a moment. You're going to begin again with 2 threads. And we're going to be casting on into the knit stitches of the actual fabric. I recommend you start at the back of the sock, but you can start wherever you want. So here's the knit stitch. We're going to insert a hook into the knit stitch. So knit stitch in the knit stitch. But here's where you're going to chain. So leave a tail end of yarn here. We're going to pull that through and chain 11. So you can use all of your thread if you want for that very first chain, or you can just use your working yarn. Whatever you want to do is fine. So there's 1, and then I'll chain 11. And once you've got those through, you're going to begin on the second chain from your hook. So skip the first chain. You're going to yarn over. We're going to insert our hook into that second chain of the row, and this is going to be a half double crochet. So you're going to yarn over, pull up a loop so that you have 3 loops on your hook. Once you have all 3 loops on your hook, you're going to close the stitch with a yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's it. So we're going to half double crochet into all of the stitches of the chain. So I'll repeat this here in the next one. And I'm going to repeat this for 2 more stitches. So that way I have a total of 4 half double crochets. In stitch number 4, we're going to do a color switch. So I've done 3 half double crochets. I'm casting on into the stitch as a 4th double crochet, and I'm just going to stop once I have 3 loops on my hook. This is where you're going to switch colors. So you're going to grab your second color, you're going to loop that over your hook, and you're going to pull that top loop, so the red loop, through the beige or ivory loops. And that is a color switch. And you're going to half double crochet 1 in red, and then half double crochet color switch. So it's going to be a total of 2 half double crochets in red, but you have to color switch on that second one. So you're going to see that in the written pattern as well. So it says half double crochet and then color switch for the next one. You will need to carry your beige yarn or the tan yarn, ivory, whatever you want to call it, So make sure you hide that right next to the chain, or hold it right next to the chain, so you can hide your yarn, because it is a reversible cuff, so we'll need to carry that yarn. Once you have 3 loops on your hook for that second half double crochet in red, you need to switch colors, so just drop your red yarn towards the back, loop in the beige yarn, and pull that through. And then you're going to complete the remaining 4 half double crochets in this light colored yarn. So once you get to the end, we are going to have to cast on a knit stitch, so that we can, it's going to be a knit stitch slip stitch combination, so that we can join the cuff with the sock. You don't want to make the cuff separately and then sew it onto the sock, because it's not going to have the same amount of stretch. Once you've got your 4 half double crochets, you are going to knit stitch into the next available knit stitch in your sock. So here's my fabric. That's the knit stitch I just worked into. I'm going to go into the next available knit stitch, insert my hook, and yarn over and cast on 1. So knit stitch in the knit stitch. Once you have 2 loops on your hook, you're going to slip stitch, so pull this top loop through this bottom loop, and you're ready to begin the next row. Turn your work around. Now this is where it gets a little bit different, so it's going to be a different stitch for the beige yarn and a different stitch for the red yarn. So we're going to half double crochet, but we are going to be using this bottom loop. So in order to create this really visible ridging, so this is that bottom loop right here. So you're only going to crochet into that when you are working with a light colored yarn. So you're not going to be working on the top stitch, you're going to work with this thread right down here. So that'll make it nice and stretchy, and it's also going to make it very visible ribbing. With the red stitching, it's just going to be a half double crochet, and then you're going to do the bottom loop half double crochet in the remaining beige stitches. So to do this stitch, you're going to yarn over and insert your hook into this bottom loop right here. Yarn over, pull up a loop, and now you've got 3, and then just yarn over, pull through all 3. So half or bottom loop half double crochet. I swear these names just get really long. I don't know if knitters have the same problem, because I don't knit, but oh my gosh, some of these crochet names just get long. All right, in this last one, we're going to drop our beige yarn. We're going to pick up the red one, loop it through, and switch color. And now that we are on the red, I will be able to explain to you why it is that the red one has just a regular half double crochet. And that is because we have to carry the tan yarn, or the ivory yarn. I swear I just keep changing color. So in order to hide it within the stitching, you have to work the half double crochet and not the bottom loop half double crochet. So if I pull this out, you'll be able to see the stitch. The first one is kind of hidden, so it's right over here. So the second one's a lot easier to see, but when you switch from that bottom loop half double crochet to your regular half double crochet, it tends to hide that first red stitch. So just keep an eye out for that one. So again, hide your yarn. So you're going to carry your tan yarn, and then you're going to half double crochet in the first one, half double crochet in the second one. That second half double crochet in red is a color switch. You don't have to carry the red yarn, so you can drop the red yarn and work that bottom loop. So it's going to be a bottom loop half double crochet in the remaining 3 stitches of the row, and 4 if you are comfortable working that half double crochet or that bottom loop half double crochet in that final stitch. If not, just work a half double crochet. That's not a problem. So here we go, and finish the row. All right, so let's start one more row together. You're going to chain 1, turn your work around, and let's repeat all of this stitching. So remember, you've got your half double crochets until you get to this bottom knit stitch. You're going to knit stitch on the knit stitch, and then turn that into a slip stitch, and then just repeat. So I'll begin this very first stitch of the row with a bottom loop half double crochet, follow it up with another 3 of these, and these are all in the light colored yarn. So I've got 1 here, and then 1 more. This last one, so stitch number 4, is going to be our color switch, so I'm only going to loop 3, and I'm going to switch to red. So here's that red stitch. I'm going to drop my light colored yarn, pick up the red yarn, yarn over, pull through 3, and then I'm going to carry the tan yarn. So there's that stitch. Again, it's kind of hidden. Make sure you pull your stitching nice and tight so that you don't have any of that tan yarn peeking out. And then I'm just going to half double crochet into this first red stitch. And then half double crochet color switch on the second one. So I'm just going to have my 3 loops. I'm going to drop my red yarn, pick up my tan yarn, beige yarn, ivory, whatever color this is, and continue. Then half double crochet into the next 3 stitches, and this is going to be the bottom loop. In that final stitch, I find that it's quite difficult. So the last stitch of each row, I think it's a little difficult to use that bottom, the bottom loop half double crochet. So I just do a half double crochet in this last stitch. So here it is. If you can work that half bottom loop, more power to you. Go ahead. Now moving on to the sock. So here's that knit stitch. That's the knit stitch we just worked into. So go into the next available one, insert your hook, knit stitch, pull up a loop, slip stitch, and turn your work around. And that's it. You're going to repeat this all the way around the sock. So it's going to look like this. So as you can see, it is stretchy, so perfect for the cuff, and it is reversible. So you'll be able to fold the sock over at the top if you want to. Once you finish all of your rows, it's going to look like this. Before you cut your yarn, chain 1. So after your final stitch, chain 1 and cut a long tail end of yarn. So here we go. This is what the inside's going to look like with all of our tail ends. Weave all of these in before you sew this closed, and yeah, so I'll let you do that, and then we can start working on the heel and the toe. So to make it a little bit easier to explain this next section, here's a photo of what the toe flap is going to look like. You're going to make 4 of these, 2 for the toes, 2 for the heels. The heels are going to have a color switch, but other than that, it's the same row counts and the same stitching for decreases. All right, so we're going to begin here at our first stitch marker, and you're just going to knit stitch in the next stitch right here, right to the left. And that's if you are right-handed. If you are left-handed, it's going to be on the right. All right, so leave a nice long tail end, and I do mean long. And this is just for the first toe flap because you're going to need this yarn to sew the stitching together. So we're going to work this as 2 different sets. So the first one is going to have 18 stitches, and then the back one is going to have 18 stitches, and you're going to sew them together. So I'm going to leave a long tail end of yarn just on this first flap. We're going to begin with a cast on of 18 stitches, and this is just your regular knit stitch cast on. So I've got my first one. We're going to go into the next stitch and then just yarn over and pull up a stitch. So the place where you're going to insert your hook is right in the center of the knit stitch from the previous round. So make sure you count them and you end up with 18 stitches. Once you've got your 18 stitches, you're going to chain 2 and work your extended return pass. Now, you're going to do one more row. So row 1 and row 2 they're both going to have 18 stitches. So row 1, row 2, cast on 18 and then knit stitch 18. Work your return pass, and then you're going to begin your decreases in row number 3. So for row number 3, you're going to skip the first vertical stitch. You already have that stitch on your hook, so we're going to skip this one. We're going to decrease using the second and third vertical stitch of the row, and this is just going to be a knit 2 together. So you're going to insert your hook as a Tunisian simple stitch in the first stitch, insert your hook as a knit stitch on the second, yarn over, and pull through both of those stitches. And that was our decrease. You're going to knit stitch into the almost all of the remaining stitches of the row. Leave the last 2 vertical stitches. So there's the final stitch. Leave this one and then leave the last 2 vertical stitches of the row. You're going to have to decrease again at the end. So I'm going to knit stitch into all of these, get to the end right here, and I'll show you the decrease one more time. So for the decrease, remember that you start with a Tunisian simple stitch in the first one and then knit stitch in the second one, yarn over, pull through both, and you should have a total of 15 at this point. So it's 15 loops on your hook. It's going to be 16 at the end of the row after you cast on into this final stitch. Now the final stitch is going to be this bottommost chain. So that very first chain of the chain 2, you're going to insert your hook into that stitch right there, yarn over, and pull up a loop. So now you should have a total of 16 loops on your hook. And then you just work your extended return pass. So you chain 2 and then yarn over, pull through 2, and then chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2 until you complete your row. So the stitch counts are gonna go as follows. So you've got row 1 and row 2 is 18, row 3, row 4, 16, row 5, row 6, 14, row 7, row 8, 12, rows 9 and 10 is 10, and row 11 and 12 is 8. When you finish row number 12, you do not need a bind off, so once you complete the return pass for row number 12, chain 1 and cut your yarn. Then you're going to turn your sock around, cast on 18, and repeat the process again. So it's going to be row 1 through 12. You should end up with 8 loops on your hook, and then you're going to do it again in the heel. So if you were smart enough to leave your stitch markers on here, that's going to make your life so much easier, so good for you. I didn't, so I have to go through and count my stitches. So cast on 18 and then 18. The row counts here are going to be just a little bit different, but that's only because it has a color switch. So you're going to work rows 1 through 6 in beige or in tan, and then you're going to work rows 7 through 12 in red. So when you switch your color, just wait until the end of the return pass where you are at the yarn over pull through 2 for the final final vertical stitch. That's when you're going to yarn over pull through 2 in red for a nice and even color switch. So complete all of the 4 flaps, and I'll see you again here in just a moment. All right, so here is everything completed. I didn't weave in any yarn ends, so you can see how many yarn ends you're going to have to weave in later. But here you go. Once you complete this, make sure you weave everything in except for this really long thread you left. You are going to use this to sew. Now the sewing part, you can use any stitch you want. I've shown you how to sew the toe and heel of socks in other tutorials, so I'm not going to show you how to do it in this one. But yeah, that's all that's left. Weave in your ends, sew your sock, and you are done. Now for those of you that are interested in resizing, the PDF pattern is available in my shop. I'm going to put a link in the description box below. But that was it. That was our tutorial for today. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. And if you would like to see more of my patterns, you can always check out my work on Instagram. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all again in the next tutorial.